side of bed. The covers were still warm where you did lay. You were gone. My heart was filled with dread.
This lady with a purple passion. If I could have done away with her and not get caught, I believe I would have done it. I used to lay awake at night fantasizing about this thing. Tomorrow morning when she's on the way to work, and by the way she always worked, I believed in her being self-supporting through her own contributions. Always thinking of others. Tomorrow morning when she's on the way to work, she's going to get run over by a big semi-truck. And it's not going to be just any trucking company. It's going to be a very affluent trucking company. And they're going to run over her and kill her, and then I'm going to sue them. And I'm going to come out of this deal getting rid of her with $2 or $3 million in hand. You Al-Anons are not the only ones that fantasize. We Alkies did it too. Believe me, we did. Second name on my sheet was the Internal Revenue Service. God, I hated those people with a purple passion. Just mention their name, and I began to froth at the mouth immediately. Joe, what was the first name on your inventory sheet?
Rose.
Rose. Wife number 1, Rose. Now, it's just that simple. That's how you fill out the first column. We go to the second column. Why am I so upset with Barbara? Well, the last year before she went to Al-Anon, she had the audacity to file for divorce 3 times. She's spending more money on lawyers and divorces than I'm spending on booze and everything that goes with it. And my God, I hated her for that. Why am I so upset with the Internal Revenue Service? Well, they're trying to put me in jail, that's why. Joe, how come you're so upset with Rose? Had an affair with another man. Really upset with her. Now we go to the third column. Now, Barbara filing for divorce 3 times, is that a threat to my self-esteem? Oh, you betcha. What are other people going to think about me now? Taking this lady back after she's filed for divorce 3 times. Barbara filing for divorce 3 times, is that a threat to my personal relationships? Sure it is. She's going to take the kids and she's going to leave, or they're going to kick me out, one of the two. No personal relationships. Her filing for divorce 3 times, is that a threat to my security? Oh yeah, by the time she's through, she'll have it all. Don't worry about that. Is it a threat to my sex life? Oh yeah, she probably won't let me have any sex if we get a divorce. The Internal Revenue Service trying to put me in jail. Is that a threat to my self-esteem? What are people going to think about me after this deal's over with? Is it a threat to my personal relationships? They're not going to let me have any relationship with my wife and children if I'm in jail. Is it a threat to my security? Oh yeah, they're going to take every penny I've got by the time it's over with. Is it a threat to my sex life? The kind I'd like to have, you betcha it's a threat to it. Now, there may be some in there I don't want, but old Rose having an affair with another man. Is that a threat to Joe's self-esteem? Is it a threat to his personal relationships? It's a threat to his security? Yeah, he'll have to go to work now. She's been supporting him for the last 10 years. A threat to his sex life? Oh, yeah. All these things are a threat to those things. Okay. When we have finished out these three columns, and we've been able to see column 1, how many resentments we have, column 2, the cause of the resentment, column 3, the part of self that was affected, and we've learned valuable information about ourselves just by filling out those 3 sheets. Now then, let's see what we do with those 3 sheets after they're filled out, Joe.
So we went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. To conclude that others was wrong was as far as most of it ever got. I always knew that. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us, and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. Now, it's plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and happiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours which might have been worthwhile.
And I read that last statement, and I stopped. And I tried to look back in my life and see how much time I've squandered in resentments. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I know about me. And when I've got a good resentment churning around up here in my head, I'm pretty well paralyzed from doing anything worthwhile. And one of my favorite things that I was doing back when I was drinking was to get up early in the morning, have a drink of whiskey and a cup of coffee, and turn on my resentment replay machine and replay what she did to me yesterday, and replay what that guy did to me a month ago, and replay what that person said to me 6 months ago, and replay what that damn boss did to me about a year ago, and replay what that damn policeman did to me 5 years ago, and replay what my uncle did to me 10 years ago, and replay what my mother did to me 15 years ago, and replay what my father did to me 20 years ago. And it took me just about an hour to run through that tape, and I loved every moment of it. When that tape would run out, I'd have another drink of whiskey and another cup of coffee, and I would turn on my Get Even machine. Now, by God, the next time she does that, I'll do this and she'll do that, and socko, I'll put it on her. They're not going to treat me that way. And it took me just about an hour to run through that tape, and I loved every moment of it. When I came into AA, I found out the only difference was I wasn't taking the drink of whiskey. I was having a cup of coffee, turn on the resentment replay machine, run it for an hour, another cup of coffee, turn on the Get Even machine, run it for an hour. I have spent literally thousands and thousands and thousands of hours in resentments. And as far as I can tell, they've never done me any good whatsoever. They certainly never made me any money. They never made me feel better. They only made me feel worse. They never straightened up a relationship with another human being. It only made them worse and worse and worse. And as far as I can tell, that was absolute, complete wasted time. Now, as a human being, I really believe today that I'm allotted just so much time to be here on earth. And I'm beginning to approach the end of mine. And for the first time in my life, not only am I sober, but I am peaceful, happy, and free. For the first time in my life, I'm sober and I feel great. I didn't know that you could be sober and feel as good as I feel today. What little time that I have left, I want to enjoy every moment of it. I don't want to waste any more time in resentments or anything else that blocks me off from God. I want to enjoy every moment of every day that I've got left. I simply do not intend to waste any more time in resentments. They block you off from God. They block you off from your fellow man. They just make you sicker and sicker and sicker. And what time we spend in them is an absolute waste of time. That's one of the worst things about a resentment. Wasting what time we have left in resentments. But that's not the worst thing. Here's the worst thing about a resentment.
He said, but with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns when we drink again, and with us to drink is to die.
That's the worst thing about a resentment. When we've got a good resentment churning around in our head, we don't feel good. We're blocked off from God. And after a while, the mind, wanting to feel better, begins to think about the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a couple of drinks. Next thing you know, we become insane. We convince ourselves it's okay to drink. And we end up taking a drink and we trigger the allergy and we end up drunk all over again. That's the worst part about a resentment. The book says if we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison. We turn back to the list. You see, this is why you got to have a written inventory. If you had it in your head, you would have lost it already. We turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. Always before, I looked at it to see what those suckers had done to me. Today, I would look at it to see what that resentment is doing to me. And if it's blocking me off from God and maybe causing me to get drunk, then I'm looking at it from an entirely different angle. We begin to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill. And I stopped and I said, Charlie, how dumb can you be? All my life I've been proud of the fact that I stand on my own 2 feet. Nobody tells me what to do. I don't need your advice, thank you. And I suddenly realized that other people, through my resentment toward them, have controlled and dominated my thinking as far back as I can remember. And if they've controlled and dominated my thinking, they've controlled and dominated my actions. They have absolutely, completely controlled and dominated my entire life for me. I always thought I was in charge, but I suddenly realized other people have been in charge as far back as I can remember through my resentments toward them. And then I said, man, you really are stupid, aren't you? Because some of these people have been dead and buried in a graveyard for years. And they've been reaching out from the grave, and they've had me by the yang-yang as far back as I can remember. And when I saw that, I said, to hell with them. I'm not going to let those people, alive or dead, live in my head rent-free any longer. I've made a decision to let God direct my thinking. And if others direct it, alive or dead, justified or unjustified, then God can't. And it's just that simple. And an amazing thing happened to me right here. We alcoholics fancy ourselves as reasonably intelligent people. Now, I don't know that we're smarter than anybody else, but I think we're reasonably intelligent people. And we don't like to look stupid. And when I saw the stupidity of letting those people control me and dominate me, it looked so dumb that about 95% of these resentments began to disappear automatically when I saw how stupid that really was. But I found that I had 4 or 5 or 6 that were so deeply embedded in my mind for so long that they didn't automatically disappear when I saw the stupidity behind them. And for those, I had to have some additional help. We now come to the first prayer in the big book in step 4. We always hear about the step 3 prayers, the step 7 prayers. We never hear about the step 4 prayers. Let's see how we can use prayer to remove those deep, deep-seated resentments.
He said, how could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So you can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind. You can't wish your way out of it. Well, this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. And though we did not like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. It's part of the prayer. We asked God to help us to show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. I'm like Charlie. I spent bleeding years. My mind was racing uncontrollably. Figured out some way I could get even with them. Many hours of my life thinking. My mind was racing uncontrollably. Figuring out some way I could get even with those people. And I finally figured out a way to get even with them. Well, the way you get even with people is you pray for them. And when you pray for them, then you're even. And you see, I didn't know that. And after I got sober, I'd been sober about 3 or 4 months, I went to a little conference in Apache, Oklahoma, and I met a lady there, some of you know. Her name was Alabama Carruthers. Some of you all knew Alabama. She became a big influence on my life. And she said a couple of things that night that really struck me. She said she had a soul sickness, and I could identify with that. Because my last night of drinking, I was sitting on a bar stool, and I had a real sick feeling in my stomach, and it wasn't a throwing up type sick, it was sick feeling. And she said it was a soul sickness. I said, that's what I had, a soul sickness. And then she said another thing that night. She said, I have peace of mind today. And boy, I mean, that really struck me, because that's all I'd ever wanted was peace of mind. And I loved Alabama. She was always excited about life and what was going to happen next. And then after that meeting was over with, we were sitting around the lobby of this hotel, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was sitting there watching Alabama operate, and it wasn't saying anything. Finally, it was just Alabama and myself and my little sponsor, George, a little black guy laying in her lap. And I began to talk to Alabama. I said, Alabama, you said you had peace of mind tonight. How did you get peace of mind? I want peace of mind. And she said, well, Joe, tell me what's going on in your mind. And I told her how I was going to meetings and going to meetings and going to meetings. But that night I'd go home and lay down and my mind would fly over and I began to think about all those situations that we talked about. And she said, well, Joe, you're just full of resentments. And I said, what is a resentment? See, I didn't know. She said a resentment was old angers and old hurts that are refelt over and over and over again. And all that anger that you intended to use up on them, you're turning it on yourself and making yourself sick and blaming it on them. She explained that to me, and it took a while for me to understand. Finally, I did. And I said, well, is there any solutions for these? And she said, yes, there is. It happens to be. And she referred to page 67 and showed me this information here. And she said, some of those deep-seated resentments like you have, you're going to need some additional help. And she said on page 551 of this book is a story of a lady who had those deep-seated resentments. And if you return to that page in the book, she said, we'll read and see what it had to say. Well, Alabama had a purse that was about this big, and it was about that deep, and she began to look in that purse. You know how they are. They're just digging around. And she finally found one of these books. I didn't think she was ever going to find it. She pulled it out of there, and she said, well, let's look at page 551 and see what this says. So I turned over page 551 in her book, and on the third paragraph, she said, this book says that I've had many spiritual experiences since I've been in the program. Many that I didn't recognize right away, for I'm slow to learn, and they take many guises. But one was so outstanding, I like to pass it on whenever I can in the hope that it will help someone else as it helped me. As I said earlier, self-pity and resentment were my constant companions, and my inventory began to look like a 33-year diary, for I seemed to have a resentment against everybody I'd ever known. All but one responded to the treatment suggested in the steps immediately.
All but one automatically began to disappear when she saw how dumb they really were.
But this one posed a problem. It was against my mother, and it was 25 years old. I had fed it, fanned it, and nurtured it as one might a delicate child, and it had become as much a part of me as my breathing. Now, it had provided me with my excuses for my lack of education, my marital failures, personal failures, inadequacies, and of course my alcoholism. And though I really thought I'd been willing to part with it now, I knew I was reluctant to let it go. One morning, however, I realized I had to get rid of it, for my reprieve was running out. And if I didn't get rid of it, I was going to get drunk, and I didn't want to get drunk anymore. In my prayers that morning, I asked God to point out to me some way to be free of this resentment. During the day, a friend of mine brought me some magazines to take to a hospital group I was interested in. And I looked through them, and a banner across the front of one featured an article by a prominent clergyman in which I caught the word resentment. Now, he said in effect, and here it is. He said, if you have a resentment you want to be free of, if you will pray for the person or the thing that you resent, you will be free. If you will ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you will be free. Even when you don't really want it for them and your prayers are only words and you don't mean it, go ahead and do it anyway. Do it every day for 2 weeks, and you'll find that you come to mean it and want it for them, and that you will realize that where you used to feel bitterness, resentment, and hatred, you now feel compassion, understanding, and love. Well, I went home after that meeting, and I got in my bed that Sunday night, lay down, and my old mind flipped over again and started racing uncontrollably. And I said, well, I think I'll pray for those people. So I started praying for those people that night, and my list got longer. The next day I prayed for those people again, and that afternoon I prayed for those people, and that night I prayed for those people. And I don't know how long it went on, whether it was 2 or 3 weeks or more, I don't know. But it seemed like I was in constant prayer for day and night, praying for those people. I don't know exactly what happened, but I do know that one morning, it was one of the beautiful spring mornings we have in Oklahoma, and I got stuck in this stoplight. Just the length of a stoplight is what happened. I looked over at that beautiful house sitting over there, and the grass was so green, it was just beautiful. The greenest green I'd ever seen. The tulips were in full bloom, red and yellow. The little squirrels were in the trees, and the birds were in the trees whistling, and it was just a beautiful morning. And I thought to myself, my God, how long has it been since I've seen that? You know, I could not remember. I could not remember. And when this book talks about being cut off from the sunlight of the Spirit, I really do know what that means. I really do. Because that morning it was so vivid. Now what happened was that those people did not change, but my thoughts and feelings toward them did change, you see, and has never returned again. Thank God for this program called Alcoholics Anonymous. I've been there, and I don't want to ever return again.
I think the reason this works so well is prayer for another human being, prayer for their welfare and their happiness. It's probably one of the greatest expressions of love that one human being can have for another. And love and hate can't exist on the same plane. And as we pray for that human being, asking that God give them in their life the same thing we want in ours, peace of mind, serenity, happiness, etc., over a period of time, that resentment will begin to disappear. Sometimes it just takes 2 or 3 prayers. Sometimes it takes every day for 2 weeks. Sometimes it might take every day for 2 months. But if we will consistently do it, we will find sooner or later that resentment is replaced with love, and the resentment disappears. Now, if you've got a resentment that you don't want to get rid of, for God's sake, don't pray about them. Because if you do, you're going to lose it. I know. I speak from experience. You know, I had a guy that I really, really, really resented. And again, I think I would gladly have put him away if I could have gotten by with it without getting caught. And when I got to this part of the inventory, I went to my sponsor. Now, this is going to be one of those take it to the grave resentments. I had no desire to remove it at all. And I'd worked on all the others, but this one is stuck in there. And I went to my sponsor and I told him about it. And he said, Charlie, you've got to get rid of that resentment. And I said, I don't want to get rid of this resentment. He said, well, that's beside the point. He said, if you don't get rid of it, sooner or later it's going to get you drunk. And in my smart mouth I said, well, how in the hell do I do it? And he said, let me show you. And he took me to this prayer too. And he said, now read that and go home and do what it says. And you'll get rid of that resentment. And I went home and got down on my knees, which again I very seldom did in those days. And I said, God, I want you to give that son of a bitch everything he deserves. And that's the only prayer I had for him that day. And I prayed again and again and again, and 3 or 4 or 5 days later, I don't know when, I found myself saying something I didn't really mean to say. I found myself saying, God, give him in his life what I want in mine. The same peace of mind, serenity, and happiness that I seek for myself. And 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 days later, I don't know when, I woke up one morning, and that resentment was gone, completely gone. And it's never returned since that date. And I think the irony in the whole situation is it wasn't 30 days later. This guy moved in as my next door neighbor. This thing really does work.
See, what I learned from this experience is that love is forgiving and love is forgiving. You see.
Now just think. This old head up here, that these display cases over here were filled with resentments, has now been emptied out. The resentments, the damaged and unsaleable goods called resentment, has now been removed from my mind. Now when that happens to me, there's another natural law that applies that says nature abhors a vacuum. No such thing as a vacuum or void. There's always something trying to rush in and fill it up. If those resentments disappear, God's not going to leave another hole in my head. I got enough of those already. They will have to be replaced with something else. And the only thing that can replace them will be the opposite of them. Where my mind used to be filled with resentments, that portion of it is now filled with love, patience, tolerance, compassion, and goodwill toward my fellow man. That's God's thinking. My thinking was the resentment. God's thinking is love, patience, tolerance, compassion, and goodwill. And that part of my mind is now filled with God's thinking. You see, there's nothing negative here at all. This is a positive happening. In part of my mind, I've now got peace of mind, serenity, and happiness. Much less chance of drinking now than I was when I started the inventory process. And what really blew my mind is this. I didn't have to go to any other fellowships, and I didn't have to read any other books to find love, patience, tolerance, compassion, and goodwill. If God dwells within me, and my book says He does, then that's always been a part of my makeup. I just never could use it before. In my chase for money, power, prestige, sex, and what I thought were the good things of life, those thoughts had to be repressed to let me operate on the level I wanted to operate on. But now that resentments are gone, they automatically come to the surface. I've never seen anything like this before. I don't really understand how this works. I simply know that if I do the simple things the book tells me to do, this happens automatically, and resentments are replaced with love, patience, tolerance, compassion, and goodwill toward my fellow man. But it would do me no good to get rid of resentments if I didn't know how to keep them from coming back. Because the world is full of sick people, and they're going to do it to me again tomorrow. And if I'm not careful, I'll resent. And it seems as though I don't get just one. When I get one, let me play with it just a little bit, and then I've got 2. And let me play with those 2, and then I've got 10. And the next thing you know, I'm a basket case, and I'm sick all over again. I've got to do one more thing. Let's unfold those last 2 columns on your inventory sheet And let's go to page 67, and we'll see if we can't find the information to fill out the last two columns.